appreciate being here today. By the way, I do feel really old. Most of the time when you talk to any group in town, if it's a political speech, I am actually the youngest person in the room. I'm serious. I mean, well, y'all probably hadn't been to many of the political deals, but you go there and literally, and Jim makes a point of going, hey, James, I've been over there and you're going to be the oldest person in the room. And I said, well, I sort of assumed that based on young professional, but then I'm introducing myself to 3 people, and 2 of them go, oh yeah, you know my parents. Oh yeah, you know my parents. So I was like, yeah, okay, I am old. But that's, hey, that's what you got, right? Now I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak to you guys today, and really, anytime you have a chance to talk to leaders and community leaders, and really, newsflash for y'all are older than you think. Okay? And I really mean that. One of the things you find is you never really think you're old enough to get into leadership, and you go and you're already there. You already are that old. And I really don't mean that as an insult. I'm going, most of y'all are probably 30-ish or 35, maybe. Some of you are 20, some really old. Back there. No, don't turn around. Don't turn around. There's only one. You're actually close to me. So anyway, and so that's what I want to talk today about. Really is some different things on leadership. I'm going to give you. Red, we're going to have to cut that internet bio down a little bit so we don't kill people. But no, just from a quick bio standpoint, really from a personal standpoint, married to my wife Alicia. We've been married to my wife. That makes sense. But for 25 years, we just celebrated our 25th anniversary, so that's a cool deal. We have 4 boys, so that tells you what I've been doing with a lot of my life. Actually, ages 22 through 14. So my oldest just became a young professional. He's got a job. That's a very good thing, working in Tulsa. He told you the background, but really I spent the first, I got a finance degree from A&M, spent the first 4 years of my career in banking in Fort Worth. We love Fort Worth. I'd probably still be there, except I got told I was getting transferred over to Dallas in one of those bank acquisition things. And some of y'all may love Dallas, but if you got told you had to work in downtown Dallas, so I had the opportunity to come back to Wichita Falls and did. Back in '93, worked for the bank for 7 years, and actually, really, after I've been back for 2 years, we got bought by Norwest. My boss left, and I ended up becoming head of commercial lending when I was 28, which was way too early because it's the second biggest bank in town. But I ended up getting it figured out, so we did that for 5 years until I was 33. When I was 33, I bought a fabrication shop just north of town. If y'all seen YPWF Fabricators, it's now called Sharp Iron, but in between Helmet and the old Wash-X, I guess now Arrow, so out that way. In 2004, bought a sheet metal machine shop, actually a failed sheet metal machine shop. That company is now Sharp Irons. We've got 120 employees in this building and in the one north of town. In 2007, bought a company out of California called Transland. We make a bunch of parts for crop dusting and firefighting airplanes. I'm telling you this background not to impress you, but just to tell you most of my background is really more in the business. So as we open up, you're welcome to ask business questions or political questions. And then in 2010, we bought this building, moved a lot of Sharp Iron over here. And I've actually just gotten into politics fairly recently. The first thing I ever ran for was the state house, and that was, I guess I'm just finishing up my first 2-year term. So I ran, starting, that would have been 3 years ago. So really, I've been in politics about 3 years. Not a lot of people know what the state house even does, right? Because all your news is national. So I'll tell you a little bit about what the state house does in Texas anyway. You can only change law in Texas 140 days every 2 years, which is actually a really cool thing. So I went to session in, was it January of 2013? You're there 5 months. We had a couple of special sessions that you might have heard about, made a little press. So we had a couple of extra little 30-day sessions. So it kind of drug on into the summer. But then once that's over, law doesn't change in Texas and can't change until we start again in January of this year. In fact, it definitely agrees with my personal philosophy, but the folks who put the Texas legislature together, or Texas government together, had a saying, and it was no man's or woman's rights and property are safe when the legislature's in session. And you got to think about it for a second, because really legislatures in general, they only put laws in place that restrict behavior, which is why you really don't want a meeting all that much. Same is true of the federal, but they feel the need to meet all the time, and does anybody actually feel better about that? Right, I don't either. So anyway, so that's the political. I'm not going to give you a highly political thing, although I am I am happy to answer questions because I want to talk to you. When I got into politics, I got into it not because I wanted to or had always thought about it, and I certainly didn't get into it because my wife thought about it. She doesn't like the upfront. But it was something, when you start to get frustrated about something, how many of y'all have ever complained about something? Anyone? How many of y'all have ever complained about government? Okay, so I'm complaining about government one time, and I had done it. I felt like it was getting too big and too intrusive, and da-da-da-da-da, and somebody asked me a question, a friend asked me a question, said, well, aren't you in a position to do something about it? Yeah, and that's what I did. Like, well, not really, and I really wasn't. I mean, we had, have a fair amount of employees and some standing in town. I mean, I'm not any all that, but, I have access to people, and I was like, well, I really can't do anything about it yet, but I could be in a position, and over the next few years, and this was really happened over the course of several years, we started feeling more of a leading to do that. My wife and I prayed about it and figured out, okay, if we're going to do that, what role would we do? Would it be city council? There's a lot of different places to get involved, right? But the issues that I was passionate about really happen on the state and federal level, and so anyway, so that's what led me into jumping into state government. So really, it was that basic frustration over the size and scope of government, feeling like government continues to expand more and more, and yet doesn't seem to really actually be helping people with their problems. In fact, sometimes it's causing a lot of the problems as I see it. Again, that's just my filter. And so I told people when I went down there, because I was very new to politics, I said, look, I'm planning on doing two things. I want to vote right, which means you got to read the bills, which, a quick aside, the first 60 days you literally can't do anything. You can't vote on a bill, can't even have a committee hearing about something. So you literally have 80 days to consider and vote on bills. Anybody want to guess how many bills we've passed this year? Except you, Jim. Jim Johnson's my chief of staff, by the way. So say hi to Jim. Okay, if you said 970 bills, you'd be right. So yeah, thank you very much. So if you do the math real quick, and you have 80 days for that, anybody think you can read all the bills? You can't. That's part of the problem. Okay, it is part of the problem. Not all those bills are very important. Some of them are very small bills that you really don't have to read, and there's tons of, we won't get into all that. But anyway, so my goal was to vote right, and I did a lot of things to make sure that we were reading and screening as many of the bills as we could to make sure that we had to vote on all those bills. And the second thing was to try to have some idea of what the solution is. It's one thing to go down and be mad and want to change things. It's another thing to want to say, okay, but can I ever do anything about it, right? A lot of people have tried and failed, and, I don't like to fail. But the odds are against you, right? And so I wanted to at least have a plan by the end of session of how I was going to try to fix what I perceived as the problems. Kind of identify the problems, put a plan in place, and then how long was it going to take to fix? Because I was pretty sure it wasn't going to be a short-term fix, right? I wasn't going to go down there and fix it in my first term, whatever it was. And so when I came out, really, I thought, well, the problem is government's too big. That's the problem. That's the root problem. Y'all ever use root cause analysis? Okay. If you're in manufacturing, like we are and have been have been since 2000, you try to look for the root cause. If you have a bad part, you can just have the part come out and then you repair the part. But that's time consuming, right? It's better to step back and figure out what's causing the part to be wrong to begin with and avoid that. So if you have a paint, paint's not actually, a good example is the bankrupt company we bought. Literally 40% of the time when they painted something, they would have to repaint it. That's pretty time consuming, right? You paint it, 40%, they were doing powder coating, you'd have to take it back and repaint it. The root cause was the air was dirty with the, they weren't keeping it clean enough, so we went back, scrubbed everything down, invested not a whole lot of money in making it cleaner, and then we had very few repairs. Now, which one's better, to try to repair it every time or go back and just fix a little problem? So you need to come back with a root cause. What is causing the problem? And so after session, I'm still on the root causes, the growth in government. And so we spent a lot of time, Jim and I did, of trying to come up with all the different techniques for decreasing government, because, by the way, that doesn't happen. Y'all know that? Government never shrinks. There's a bunch of reasons for it. It's the bureaucracy. There's a whole lot more money in getting government to grow than there is in shrinking it, right? There's a whole lot of people lined up that want government to grow because they benefit from it and they make money from it. There's virtually nobody lined up to say, let's decrease government, because nobody's getting a contract from the decreased government. That makes sense? Bureaucrats don't ever want to shrink their agency because they get paid more if it grows, right? I mean, so there's a whole lot more you really got to think to ever figure out how to shrink it. And so we spent actually a lot of time coming up with, here's the different strategies, the techniques. I'm a finance guy, so I'm trying to figure out, okay, gap accounting, and there really are a lot of ways you can do that. But about 90 days ago, I felt like at 4 o'clock in the morning, when you wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, it's either a bad burrito or you got a word from God. And I felt like I got hit with what I think is the root cause of the growth in government, and that is the decay of the culture. That's the decay of the culture. That really, when you boil it down, the reason government continues to grow is because the culture itself is decaying. That is much more the root cause than simply that government is growing. You say, okay, well, what? That's depressing. Aren't you all the others got depressed? Is that my drink? No, that's not my drink. There it is. Thank you. Walking fast. Yeah, I'm going to leave. Yeah, cheers. So you knew this would be motivating, didn't you? So I'm not going to go into a lengthy definition of culture, but I mean, culture is kind of what we think. And really, from a positive side, the United States has a much better culture than the vast majority of the world. How many of y'all have traveled outside the country? Anybody travel to Africa? Okay. Oh, there we go. Now all the arms went down. Okay. Look, the culture in most places in Africa is unbelievably bad. They can't. They can't sustain anything. Mexico, not counting the vacation places. Like the real parts of Mexico, right? Not necessarily right. And so we have a culture that is pretty good. Now, is it declining? Yeah, I think so. But our culture still has a lot of good things about it. And this is not a new thought, by the way. It took me till I was 47 and a whole session plus a significant amount of interim to tumble on this conclusion. But there's a couple people that have thought of it before. And as we started looking at it, and I say we because Jim and I have been doing a lot of thinking, that's one of the great things is you actually have time to think. You don't have time to think during session, but during the interim you go to hearings and this kind of stuff, and you actually have time to think before the next session. But so there's a couple of people that actually agreed with me. I finally figured it out 200 years later. Benjamin Franklin says about our form of government, only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. Only a virtuous, and we're talking obviously there the culture, only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become more corrupt and vicious, which is I think a little bit where we are right now, they have more need of masters, which are laws, right? The more your culture decays, the more laws, i.e. growth in government, that you're going to have. Okay? And I think that's true. When you don't have the ability, your people don't have the ability to regulate themselves, then they are in need of more masters. So the less self-regulation we have, the less people that have any internal regulations, the more laws you have to have. John Adams said, another one of our founding fathers, public virtue cannot exist in a nation. So public virtue, the government, public virtue cannot exist in a nation without private virtue. And the public virtue is the only foundation of republics. So he would say our form of government can't exist without some amount of moral underpinning, call it virtue. Now, that lines up with the fact that we have tried to export democracy to a lot of countries where it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? In my opinion, it doesn't work because in many cases, the place you try to export representative democracy, we don't live in a pure democracy, hopefully you guys know that. Representative democracy doesn't work if you don't have some amount of virtue in the people. Okay, and that is, you can look at all the places we have tried to export democracy and it doesn't work because then the masses take over the minorities. You have very bad things happen to minorities if you don't have any amount of self-regulation. So, and if you're not a big fan, you don't even care what form of government. Hopefully, most of y'all want representative democracy. Because there are other forms of government. You can live in a dictatorship. That's fun if you're the dictator, right? So hopefully, most of y'all, would be sort of motivated to help out because you want to live in a representative democracy. But if you just want economic prosperity, economic prosperity requires virtue. There's a book called Democracy in America that I hope none of y'all have read because it's like 800 pages. It's really hard to read. I didn't make it through all the way, I will confess. But it's one of the greatest books written on the country. And it mostly talks about the United States, but it also talks about Mexico. And it says, Mexico will never be an economic power because its leaders are corrupt. Its culture is corrupt. And most of you would kind of nod and go, Mexico won't be a power. You know when Democracy in America was written? 1840. Sounds like it was written yesterday, right? Y'all, you're going, yeah, because the culture is pretty close to the same. And I'm not slamming the people of Mexico, but I'm saying the culture, there's not enough people doing good and ensuring laws are followed. So we have to have that. Anyway, all right, enough of that. Hopefully I've at least convinced you that the culture is pretty important if you want to live in a country worth living in. And, I'm going to talk some on politics today, but as I've started to study the culture issue, some of y'all may have already studied this, and how we change culture. You can break it down a bunch of ways, but the best way I've seen breaks it down into 7 pillars, if you will. I've heard it called mountains. Jason was talking about the mountains, but we're going to call them pillars. Most people understand that. 7 pillars of culture. 7 places to impact. Because I'm going to talk to you for the last 10 minutes about, or when I get to the last 10 minutes, about how to get involved politically. But I understand in a group this size, I'd love for some of y'all to be active politically, but not everybody's called to do that. And it's not necessarily everybody's season in life to do it. If you'd have talked to me 20 years ago, I would have ignored you, right? I voted and that kind of stuff, but it wasn't my time to be involved. But all of us are involved in the culture in one way or another, and so I'm going to give you the 7 different ways, or the 7 different pillars. You kind of consider which of these areas you're involved in and what you might be able to do to help out. So the first one, and this is in no order, by the way, because, again, this is not really from one source. This is from a bunch of different ones. The political, and we've already talked about the impact. I mean, everybody understands when, and really you can see places in this country where you have cities that the government is totally corrupt. Or not totally, but we have where they're more corrupt than others, right? You can see some parts of the country where there's more political corruption, less political corruption in other parts. You have different states, different cities. We'll leave it there. I'm gonna come back to the political one anyway. But it matters to the people who are being governed. I'd like government to not be nearly as important as it is. But it affects, especially as we go through the rest of the pillars, you go, wow, the government has a hand in that as well. Schools. Schools are a pillar, a cultural pillar. For any of y'all involved in schools, how we educate the next generation. So the curriculum that we teach in our public schools. Whether you have the freedom to teach in a private school. Whether you have, we're kind of weird, we homeschool our kids. My wife's education, master's in education, we homeschool. Whether you have, there are people that don't think that we should have the right to do that. Okay? Yeah, actually we had, I saw the look on your face. We actually, Texas is very homeschool friendly, but 30 years ago we had an attorney general that said parents are not smart enough to raise their kids, much less educate them at home. And when you think about the circular reasoning of that, who are you going to have teaching them but somebody else's parents? Right? I mean, if you're so arrogant that you think, and this is the problem in government, if you're so arrogant you think everybody else is stupid, then you're going to treat everybody like dogs, which is what I think a lot of the political elite on both sides of the aisle think, which is, y'all aren't smart enough to do it yourself, let me do it for you. All right, sorry. Occasionally I get on a soapbox, you'll have to forgive me. Business is another pillar. How businesses operate matters. Okay, it matters a lot. It used to be, in our economy, people served other people. And it was a good thing, and we were better off. I was really good at horseshoeing horses. You were really good at raising grain. And so you traded grain, and I could do horseshoes, and we were both better off. Okay? But as it has become with many businesses, it's not how can I serve my customer and get paid. It's how can I skin my customer as much as is legal. Right? How can I get as much out of it as possible? It's all about me and very little about you. And that creates a little bit of cultural decay, if you will. Media. Let's get on media. We got a couple of media people here. Now, we won't get on media, but media is definitely one of the pillars, and really when media does right, it is actually, it keeps a lot of the others in check. I mean, the amount of, political malfeasance that has been caught by media, when it is done well, it is an important part of society, right?
That's right.
And when it's done poorly, and when it's done without a cultural, without virtue, it pulls down the society, right? I think. Another one. We won't go. You can comment on this later, right?
Oh, it's your floor.
No. We'll have Q&A. We'll have Q&A. But no, media is an important part. Churches is an important part. My wife and I we spent all our adult life in churches focused on that. And it is very important, but churches need to make sure, churches and other religious organizations, they need to impact outside just their walls to have the kind of impact that I think we want to have a virtuous country. Maybe a little more love, a little less legalism would go well there too. Arts and entertainment, different than media. Arts and entertainment is an important part of our culture. In fact, as people have so much more time, it is an amazingly important part of the time. How many of y'all know people literally spend 5 and 6 hours a day watching TV? I mean, if y'all don't, they just ain't telling you the truth. I am amazed how much time is spent watching TV, and I'm talking by, from the poor end of the political spectrum that maybe aren't working, and how much they're watching, to the folks that have made enough money, whether it's inherited or sold a business or whatever, that they don't know what to do, so they're just, And, but our entertainers, and you've heard them, whether they're sports people or movies, say, well, it doesn't matter, my job's not to be the parent, my job's just to make the movie. Or it doesn't matter, if you're going to be part of the culture and part of making the culture better, then it is part of your job. And the last thing I'll say on that, since most of y'all aren't in the entertainment business, if you want less trash, buy less trash. They make what we buy. If it's trash, don't buy it. That make sense? A little bit of, sorry. Okay, we'll get to the political, right? But the last one, and this is definitely not the least, because I think it's most important, is the family. Really, it is amazing. Almost every committee that you sit on down there somehow is tied to the breakdown of the family. I'm sitting on the restructuring for foster care, the foster care system, and been doing that a lot. So the breakdown, and particularly basically the absence of the male in a home, the splitting of the home. It is amazing how many costs are throughout the system, and how much of the government is caused by basically the disintegration of the family. And that's not to take a shot at single mothers or single dads for that matter, but there's two of us, and I can't imagine it doing it by myself. That's a hard road to hoe. So anyway, so that's the bad news. But I think again, there's good things and bad things going on in the culture. I think most of us would say it's slipping, but you can have an impact on any part of that you're involved in, and hopefully that's the encouraging thing to say. You know what? I don't have to be involved in politics to make an impact. I can be involved in anywhere in the culture. If I'm making a positive impact, start with the city. If you can go past the city, take out, do the state and the country. But at least we're responsible to do our own part wherever you're called to do it, right? And I would suggest starting with your family. If you can't do it in the family, you probably shouldn't export it. You know what I mean? Most of y'all want to be leaders, my guess is. If you can't be a leader in your home, probably shouldn't be a leader much other places. So, okay, so let's talk about, I'm going to talk specifically about the leadership or how to be involved politically and how to get things done, and just give you a couple of ideas that I've seen. For those of y'all who are interested in politics, or you may not be interested in the whole realm of politics. In fact, I'm not interested in the whole realm of politics. I don't know how many of the 8 or the 975 bills I was actually interested in, but it wasn't all of them, I promise you. Okay? So you may be interested in politics, which is all of it, or you may be interested in issues, which is a little bit of it. All right? So one way you can have, and to me, everybody, I hope everybody in here votes. If you're a young professional and wanting to be a leader and you're not engaged enough to at least vote, that's not good, all right? You at least need to do that. That's it is amazing, but it's probably less than a quarter of people that vote that can vote. So the first thing I would suggest that would give you a disproportionate impact on the culture, meaning on the political side of things, is having information on your issue. It is amazing how few people have real information on a given issue. And by the way, if you think about your elected officials, I've noticed a lot of people come up to me and they will say, they'll ask me something really specific about a really specific issue and be shocked if I don't know it. And I don't know if they thought that if they plug this stuff into your brain, you know what I mean? If you just have this whole library that gets implanted in your brain and all of a sudden you have this huge knowledge on something. You know, a doctor will ask me something about a specific part of Medicaid as if, you know what I mean? I'm like, well, you know, and just a little hint, assume your legislators are stupid. That would be helpful. And then let them surprise you when they actually know it. You didn't put that on there, did you? But it's a good piece of advice. But the point is, if you think about it, with almost 1,000 bills in 80 days, how many of those can you truly get informed about? So if you're me, what are you looking for? A, you're looking for a chief of staff that is National Merit Scholar. Check. Got it. Legislative director. Check. That's good. But beyond that, you're looking for people, constituents who understand an issue. So if you understand an issue and can communicate what you think ought to be done, you've got a very strong chance of having my ear, or Craig Estes' ear, or Matt Thornberry's ear, or whoever, right? So if you have an issue that you're interested in, you getting knowledge about it will allow you influence if you'll then communicate it. The second way that I think is helpful for you to know, because most people, honestly, they get mad at politics, but they don't know how to influence it. And so I'm trying to give you a couple of tools to do it. The second thing is almost everything happens in politics through groups. And you can call them special interest groups, and you can be mad at that. Everybody talks bad about special interest groups. You know what special interest groups are? And there are plenty of bad ones. But most special interest groups are much more like Farm Bureau, right? Who, you know, they represent a bunch of different landowners in rural areas and, you know, farmers, and they give them a voice and a coordinated voice across the state. Now, do I agree with Farm Bureau on everything? No. But they are able to, well, yes, I do. You have to tell your board members that I do. No, I mean, we're close, but that gives input to a bunch of different people that may not know to show up at Austin at a hearing. In fact, one of the things that drives me crazy, a quick aside, we were debating a bill, and I won't go into the details of the bill, I mean, because it doesn't matter. But basically a person says, well, if they didn't like that bill, why didn't anybody show up at the hearing? And I said, because nobody knew the hearing was going on. You know what I mean? I mean, people don't know that they need to show up at hearings to protect their freedom to continue to do something, right? You don't know. I mean, did y'all know that? Did y'all know that you needed to show up at a hearing to allow you to keep doing whatever it is you're doing? I mean, the reason I knew about it really is because every once in a while people come up with a bill that says you can't homeschool or putting great restrictions on it. That's part of what pulled me into it, is going, wait a second, I didn't know that somebody could just decide that I wasn't my kid's parent. I didn't know that. You know, or you did, you know, if you have a part-time business, you know, you didn't know that you had to have some type of license to be able to sell bread out of your home. You know, I mean, just kind of, you didn't know. So anyway, okay. So being involved in those groups, sorry, I went way off. Being involved in those groups gives you a voice, and you can be a leader. You know, you guys, hopefully most of y'all are looking to be leaders. You can be a leader in those groups. We've had the head of the Texas Restaurant Association out of Wichita Falls. The Texas Restaurant Association is very powerful. Okay? We've had the head of the Texas Realtors Association out of Wichita Falls. In fact, currently, I think Mike Dietrich's one of the big wigs there. We've got the head of the Texas Independent Physicians. One of the board members is out of Wichita Falls. One of the people, a board member of the Teachers Retirement System, is out of Wichita Falls. You can do that and have literally statewide impact by just getting involved in some of those groups. And again, the groups, on almost any issue, you'll find 3 or 4 groups, and the debate between those 3 or 4 groups shapes that policy. Okay, it's not a bunch of individuals, it's not even the individual legislator, maybe my bill, but the groups, because of their statewide reach, have a lot of impact on the bills. So knowing groups, networking with your legislator is also a good way to do it. Okay, and networking in kind of a nice way. You know, cussing me out, that kind of stuff won't help you that much, but just communicating with your legislator. What's that? Throwing the book at me. Knowing who your legislators are is better than most people. So, all right. And last thing would have to do with really networking, and this is something we're still working on getting good at, but really social networking and that kind of stuff. If you have a lot of friends and you tell them how you're going to vote on a particular issue or what you think about a particular issue, you will have a huge impact because most people aren't doing that, right? And if you can influence, if you think about it, if only 10% vote in an election, in any given election, if 10% of people vote, your vote is worth 10 times what it would be worth if all 100% voted, right? You're going to have 10 times bigger impact. If you send an email to 10 people and get 10 people to change their mind, now your opinion is worth 100 times more than it would have been. You can do the math from there, right? If you get 100 people to vote on a particular issue, your vote is worth 1,000 times, or your opinion. Your vote's still just worth 1, hopefully, unless you're a fan of mine. Okay, so those are the ways that I think the best ways that we've come up with, or that I've come up with, to try to tell people that, you know what, you can influence things, because I think one of the things that really drives me crazy is so many people have kind of given up on representative democracy. And I'm going, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, it's too hard. Or I don't know how to impact. They've given up. I'm going, there is only you're going to be governed somehow. You can either have representative democracy or you can have something with a lot less representation. But representative democracy is hard, and it's cumbersome and it's painful, but your choices are usually a king or queen or dictator. That's your choice. If you want to be free, you can't be lazy. It is hard to protect and requires work. And I hope that talking to a group of young folks, we can get some of y'all interested in it, whether it's politics today or just or the culture today. So the last thing I'll say before I open it to questions is a lot of times when I talk to young folks, they're saying, well, I wish I could do this. I wish I could do that, whether it's politics or I wish I could be a part of this. If you will set your goal, your eyes on the goal, instead of seeing all the reasons why you can't do it, and just pay attention to the goal, all the obstacles go away. Right? Most people, I really think there's 2 types of people in the world. There are people that see all the obstacles, why they can't get someone, they're seeing this obstacle, and there's people that all they can see is the goal, and they can't see the obstacle because they keep their eye on the goal so much. And so whatever that goal it is, and honestly, the other thing is to make sure you have your eye on the right goal. That's the other thing. Choose the wrong goal. So anyway, that's it for my sermon today. Thank you all very much. I'll be happy to answer questions.
How large is your staff that you work that works through reading all those bills?
It's enormous staff of 3 people.
Wow.
that are pretty basically the way a state house works, you got room to hire and really you really only have room to hire 2 people, but since they work for not a lot, and I mean that seriously, you hire a chief of staff, a legislative director, and have a district director that's a little bit part-time. So really there's two people, because the district director primarily handles the other side. Other than the law, a lot of what we do is handle constituent issues. In fact, I call myself Drano. The state governments something's not working right, and they just can't get an answer, and a call from the legislator gets it done. And you got to be kind of careful with that, but that answer your question?
Yeah, sure.
Now, in fairness, though, there's a lot of other people that read it. You got all these special interest groups. You got the We Hate Any Taxes groups, which are great. I love them. But they will tell you if there's a new tax in here, right? And so you have warning, right? You got pro-life groups, pro-abortion groups. You got pro and anti everything. So there's tons of great Farm Bureau. I mean, if there's something that's going to take land from people, an eminent domain type of bill, they're going to be all on it, and they're going to be sending you stuff. And so you've got plenty of feedback. Being able to focus on all of it. And usually you can know the small bills. You know, we actually also have local and consent small bills that are supposed to be small, but occasionally something will get slipped in there.
Right.
So, sorry, I'll try to keep the answers short so we can answer more questions. Yeah.
Something to think about. So Walter and I work with the chamber.
Yep.
You're talking about special interest groups. We're a special interest group.
Yep.
We represent the business community and the citizens of Wichita Falls in general. But I'll also say that the young professionals can be a special interest group.
Absolutely.
I've seen quite a few YP groups that work themselves into situations to where local elected officials go to them to see what their interests are in terms of the next community development project or whatever they're doing with the city.
Yep.
And so that's something you guys could move towards if y'all are interested.
It's a very good point. And if I can, I'm going to segue and talk about the chamber. When I went down there, I thought the business groups are going to love me, right? I mean, I'm a finance major. I've only been in business. Most of the business groups don't like me, including the chamber. This chamber likes me, I think. but I don't like the U.S. and the state chambers of commerce's. I don't agree with most of their philosophy because I am pro free enterprise. Most of the chamber is pro business. The difference is I don't think it's my job. I think it's my job as a legislator to make sure that there are level playing fields for businesses to compete. I don't think it's my job to make sure that one business, typically a large business, typically a large dues-paying national member to the national chamber, this is not you, to the national chamber, should have unfair competitive advantage. And so my point in saying that is certainly not to put you on the spot, is to say part of what you can do in getting involved in groups is to make sure that groups actually represent individuals. One of the problems with most of the groups is they're either based in Austin, which is the People's Republic of Austin, as I call it. Okay? And that's not because of UT, that's just because it is, you know, or it's based in Washington, D.C. What do those two cities have in common? Half the people that work there work for the government. They're going to want more government. So you put your lobbying efforts in those places, they're going to have a tendency to be much more liberal than you as an individual are. So just because you get involved in a group, you can also influence, not to give that group more power, but to make sure that group is pushing for the things that you think need to be pushed for. That make sense? So it wasn't a complete slam. I don't want all of that whole thing.
A good example. Yeah, local chambers in the U.S. Chamber are completely.
Couldn't be
They're
more
purely an advocacy group. And here's a good example. Right now, the U.S. Chamber is really getting nailed a lot because they came out and supported BP, who was trying to get out of a lot of the negotiated settlement for the Deepwater spill that the BP lawyers had negotiated in the first place. And so now chambers of commerce who are paying members of the U.S. Chamber all around the Gulf Coast, like 5 states, are up in arms trying to figure out why would this organization do this to
Because they're really
get
big
BP
dues.
pays them probably 6 figures in dues, if not more.
Sure. And
Whereas
then,
we don't get involved in specific
right.
business issues like that.
No,
Right? We do advocate on issues, but not like that.
But it shows the importance of getting involved, because you can get that stuff stopped, but you can't get it stopped if you're sitting on the sidelines, right? Yeah.
We sort of see a lot of influx of businesses come into Texas because of our taxes.
Huh?
But I know that Texas as a whole is drying out as far as water. Not just Wichita Falls, but there's other counties that are doing that. Is that a state level issue that we have to deal with? Is a plan in place to?
It is primarily a local issue, because in Texas you don't buy water from the state of Texas, you buy water from the city of Wichita Falls, and everybody's watershed is different, right? I mean, where the water is in the distribution system is primarily a local. What the state did do last session is put $2 billion aside for water projects, which I think the city of Wichita Falls next week is making a presentation for a $33 million loan from that. I think it's from that fund, or it may be from an existing one, but we put $2 billion. So that the state's role is to make at this point, the state's role is to make the financing easier And then we're also working with the state right now on, basically on technology. I think one of the things the state hasn't done a good job is, one of the problems with a diffused distribution system for water, meaning all cities take care of themselves, is there's not a great sharing of technology and information between them. You know, if Brownwood figures out how to do something smart, Wichita Falls doesn't necessarily find out. And so the state can and should, we have a water development board, but they don't really, frankly right now they're mostly a information resource. They're not really helping to coordinate it, and we're talking, that's been one of the good things during the interim. It's been a lot busier interim than I thought with the water development board stuff, because the water development board right now, the water development board right now is helping us out at Lake Arrowhead, thank you, Lake Arrowhead, we've got a chemical that's going out there to try to decrease the evaporation. The water development board is paid for all the measuring devices to try to measure how effective it is. Okay, and I know you may say, why would we try to keep the evaporation down? Right now we're only using 12 million gallons a day, and we're losing about 40 million gallons a day to evaporation. Yeah, and actually right now with the reuse project, we've gone from 12, and since we're reusing, we're only pulling 7 million out. So now the math is we're pulling 7 million gallons out of the lake, and we're losing 40 million up. So, yeah, thank you. So yeah, if you want to think about it, if you could put a lid on the lake, which you can't, but if you put a lid on it or store it underground, we have over 10 years of water out there today. But with evaporation, we have less than 2, or we have about 2. Pending. So, so the evaporation to me, and we've been working with the Water Development Board, so that to me is where the state comes in, is some of the stuff that the cities can't do, or can't do as well as they could. That's where the state's role is. And the federal government has no role in it except to make our lives really difficult.
How's that going to affect shepherds? I mean, I've heard...
It's not. I don't believe it will. I mean, I've talked to everybody, but I could certainly be being lied to. I mean, Kinsvarter and Thornberry say, you know, they're going to stick it out. There's going to be water. We will have water from somewhere. There's several different places. If we start to get lower and lower, there are several different places you can bring water in. There's some, the Blaine Aquifer has water. There's actually some men and women drilling wells over on the east side that they think they can get up to 4 or 5 million gallons a day just in water under the ground.
Those are finite sources, right?
What's that? Well, the Blaine Aquifer is a group of, that's actually a group of individuals that they're going to finance it, and the city needs to sign a 10-year contract saying we want that water. But the city, you know, the real fundamental problem with water is if you do that and it rains, the water that rains is free. So if we sign a 10-year contract to pay for water, we could have just signed $100 million, you know, you go, it doesn't cost that much, but it may be that we pay $100 million for water over the next 10 years that if it rains, we get for free. We're not going to run out of water. I mean, famous last words. It could get expensive. There's going to be water, but you're going to have to move it from somewhere, which is where the state and the coordination is going to have to come in. But there's a lot of underground water sources that people have never needed to use. It's just an expense thing. It's funny, how many of y'all complain? I mean, so many people complain about their water bill, and you think about it, you know you pay less than half a cent a gallon to get water delivered to your house. That's after the rate increase, and you're going, less than half a cent a gallon, and yet some people are weeping and gnashing. And I mean, it is bad anytime you have something increase, and I'm not even with the city, by the way. Don't blame me for that, but when you look at it, that's the hard thing about spending all this money. We pay so little for our water, it's hard, you know, to be willing to do that new pipeline. So anyway. Yes?
The good news on the waterfront is we've still got businesses interested in moving here and expanding here. We just had 2 projects we brought to the 4A board last week that they approved the incentives for. One's moving here from somewhere else in the region, and one's an Argentinian company. This is going to be their first ever U.S. location. They're not worried about the water. They say what you say. They'll get resolved.
Yeah, you're going to get water, and it's such a small part of it. It's such a small cost of doing business. Unless you're a huge process company, PPG or something. It's such a small. I mean, our water bill here. I mean, our electric bill's, you know, $25,000 a month, and our water bill's probably $500 or something. You know, I mean, water is a small cost of doing business as long as you can get it, and we will have it from somewhere. It'd be nice if we have it from rain. And that's absolutely least expensive, best way to get it. On a positive note, Kemp, a lot of people, by the way, say, well, why didn't Wichita Falls do anything? One of the things that the city, and I'm not taking credit for this, but sometimes it helps to go, oh, you know what, somebody was thinking about this. Because I remember when they did it, and I thought, why are they doing that? And they spent an extra $20 million for an RO plant, reverse osmosis plant. The reason they did that was so they could use Lake Kemp water. Lake Kemp is very salty water, but Lake Kemp has 3 times the watershed, the area that captures rain, than the other 2 lakes. So when you hear the water figures, usually it doesn't include Kemp because it's a little more expensive, but that water is there. Lake Kemp is actually like 4 or 5% higher than it was this time last year. So even with not having great rain, Kemp captures so much water and we can treat it. So people are thinking ahead, even though, and again, I don't know that I would have done that. I didn't really think about it much. I just remember going, why are we treating Lake Kemp? We got plenty of water. Sometimes, occasionally, the people who are in charge are doing good stuff and don't get credit for it. Not very often. Sometimes they're doing bad stuff and don't get caught. What else? Yes.
Speaking of, the water problem that we do have, you've attended the hearings for the Joint Interim Commission to study water desalination.
Yes.
Okay, I've been to a couple of those hearings as well. Can you comment on anything that's going on along with that right now?
Well, I mean, where's the government's role versus private sector? You can get salt out of water. Period. There's 4 primary different ways to get salt out of water, and if you want to talk Wichita Falls, the problem is getting the source water.
Right.
You know what I mean? Wichita Falls would be fine if we had this huge source of brackish water underneath, salty water underneath us. We can get the salt out. So really, all this desal is just making it more and more cost effective. And frankly, I think the things going on in the oil and gas industry, because they use so much water and the technology there has improved a lot. So it's already getting less and less expensive. I don't think there's anything huge that's going to come out. By the way, I don't think there's anything huge that comes out of most government committees. There's a lot of meetings and a lot of discussion, but most of that stuff's going to go on without the government.